Hilchos Shekalim Perek Revi'i, the laws of the half shekel coin, chapter 4. Last 3 days we're learning that the Jews gave a half shekel coin of silver each year to the temple treasury. From the Jew's perspective, he was giving it as a kapara, as an atonement for himself. But what about from the temple's perspective? What did they do with all of this money? So it was all brought into this room. This is called the lishka, one of the chambers. All the money would go into these 3 boxes, and then 3 times a year they would take from these 3 boxes into smaller sacks. This was called the trumas halishka. See, the separation from the room. All the rest of the money that would hang out in these boxes and on the floor, whatever didn't make it into these sacks, is called shiyare halishka, the leftovers in the chamber. And today the Rambam describes what was done with both sets of money. What was done with the money put in the sacks, and what was done with the shiyare halishka. So he begins with Aleph, trumas halishka ma yaseba. What do you do with the main, separated money, the one that went into the sacks? The separated money from the chamber, what did you do with it? A bunch of things, it turns out. They would buy from it the daily sacrifices. Every day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, there was a korban tamid, a constant sacrifice. That was bought from this money. The hamusafin, all additional sacrifices on Shabbos, on holidays, on Rosh Chodesh. There was a musaf sacrifice. Who paid for those? This money. B'chol karbanes hatzibur, the truth is all communal sacrifices, vinis kehem, and their wine libations. Nesachim is actually a general term for wine and flour. Every sacrifice was accompanied with wine and flour. The wine and flour for communal sacrifices was also paid by this money. The hamelach shemelchin by kol hakarbanes, and the salt that was used to salt all sacrifices. If you look here, this is a bird's eye view of the mizbeach, of the altar, and on the side of the ramp there was always a pile of salt. So as the kohanim would walk up with the sacrifice that was supposed to be burnt, they would take some salt, sprinkle it, and salted the sacrifice. It's actually a biblical commandment. Who paid for the salt? This money, trumas halishka. V'chein ha'etzim, same thing for wood. The mizbeach constantly needed wood. There was a bunch of piles of wood on the mizbeach. Where'd you get all the wood from? So typically, there was a couple of families who would sponsor the wood. They would go to the forest, chop the wood, bring it to the Beis HaMikdash. But let's say the families didn't bring any wood, or there was too little wood. V'chein ha'etzim, says the Rambam, so too the wood, im lo heviu etzim, if the families didn't bring their usual wood, and they could only find wood for money, this trumas halishka would pay for it. The incense that was brought every day in the temple. This is actually an image of the Kohen Gadol, who typically brought the ketores on Yom Kippur. But the truth is, the Kohen Gadol can bring the ketores whenever he wanted. So maybe it's also from a weekday. Point is, he's bringing the incense. Who paid for the incense? And the salary for those who would make the ketores, which was a very complex recipe, was all paid for by this money of the half shekel coins. The showbread and the pay for the people who made the showbread, also a very complex type of work. You had to bake the loaves to be folded over, and they couldn't rise. They were actually matzah. They looked thick, and they were thick, but they weren't allowed to rise for more than 18 minutes. And every Shabbat, they would be changed. 12 new loaves of bread. So the money for that also came from the half shekel coins. The ha'omer, and the barley sacrifice, the omer sacrifice that was brought on the second day of Pesach, was paid for by this half shekel coin. Ushtei alechem, and the 2 breads that were brought on Shavuot. You see there? Those are 2 loaves of bread, and these are 2 lambs that were brought as a special sacrifice on the holiday of Shavuot. That was paid for also by the trumas halishka. Upara aduma, and the red heifer that was once in a while brought and sacrificed to be able to purify people from ritual impurity of touching a corpse. The soyer hamishtaleach, the goat that was sent away. On Yom Kippur, there were 2 special goats that were involved in a raffle. One was a sacrifice, and one was sent away and thrown off a cliff, and that would signify the atonement of the Jewish people's sins. The loshin shel zahiris shekaishin ben karnav, and the red band that was tied between its horns. Before the Kohen would push it down, he would take a red band, which is this one, divide it in half. Half of it he would tie between the horns, half of it he would tie near a rock, near the cliff. And when he pushed down the goat, when he would see the band turn white, that was the sign of atonement. So who paid for this goat and for the red band? The communal funds of the half shekel coin. Kol elu bayin mitrumas halishka. All of these things came from the main separated money from the half shekel coins. Beis avol par helem davar shel tzibur. There is 2 communal sacrifices that were not paid for by these funds, and that is par helem davar shel tzibur. Literally, it means the bull that was brought when something was hidden from the community. There's a whole set of laws in the 9th book of the Rambam about this. When the high court rules mistakenly, and all the Jews, or most of the Jews, follow them. Let's say they say this piece of meat in the cow is kosher, but really it's not. So everyone ends up eating non-kosher. So now the entire community has to bring a bull as a sin offering. That's called the par helem davar shel tzibur. Useirei avodas kerchavim, and the goats that were brought for idol worship, same thing. If the high court rules mistakenly in an issue of idol worship, they have to bring goats on behalf of every tribe. So these two communal sacrifices, batchila goyvin lahen, they were initially collected for. In other words, if the case arose, all the Jewish people would contribute funds on the spot. The einon bayin mitrumas halishka, they didn't come from this communal collection of the half shekel coins that were separated in the chamber with the money. Paroiches shel heichal, the two curtains that divided between the inner chamber of the Bet HaMikdash and the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies. That's on the left side over here. The Rambam says, these curtains, tachas binyan asuyos, they're actually in place of the structure. And therefore they were not paid for by the half shekel funds. Rather, they were paid from a different fund that was called Kodshe Bed Kabayis, things that were consecrated for the upkeep of the house. Anything to do with the actual structure of the Bet HaMikdash didn't come from the half shekel coins. The Talmud relates that in the first temple, there was actually a wall between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKodashim. A literal structure, but in the second temple, because it was much taller, they couldn't build a wall that big that would stand and support. So they made two massive curtains. So since the curtains are in place of the structure, they're treated like the structure. And the half shekel coins don't pay for them. Aval paroiches shel sha'arim, but the curtains that were on any other gateway in the temple, for example, over here, this is a main doorway. There was doors and there was a curtain. The curtain was just there to provide extra tzniut, extra modesty. These weren't part of the structure. And therefore, they were paid for by the half shekel funds. The actual menorah and any other service vessels that were used in the temple, the ideal mitzvah is that they should be paid for from the leftover of the libations. What is the leftover of the libations? Says the Rambam of Hilchos klei hamikdash v'ha'ivdim by yisboyer mahu meisar nesachim. In the 8th book of the Rambam, in the section that deals with all the vessels that were used in the temple, I'm going to explain to you what is the leftover of the libations. So I looked ahead. I'll tell you what it is. There was always a need for wine and flour in the temple, because every sacrifice was accompanied by wine and flour. Jews didn't bring, even if they brought their animal from home, they didn't bring wine and flour from home. They would want to buy it on the temple grounds. So how would the temple have so much wine and flour in stock? They would have to buy from a wholesaler, right? Now, in halacha, there's a rule that hektish, the temple treasury, has to always have the upper hand when it comes to financial issues. So what would they do? Once a month, the temple treasury. Once a month, the treasurer of the temple would sit down with the wine wholesaler, and they would set a fixed price for wine for the coming month. Let's say I'm going to pay you $100 a barrel. And that's what hektish had to pay, maximum. So for example, if during that month the price of wine rose, hektish was still buying wine at $100 a barrel. And if the price of wine dropped, hektish would lower their price and pay at a lower price. So they were always on top. So now, the temple treasury, when they set the fixed price in the beginning of the month, that means they put aside that amount of funds to buy for the month. So if the price of wine stays the same, then they're going to end up using all their money. But if the price of wine drops and they're going to now get a discounted rate, they have extra money. So that extra money is called moisar hanesachim, the leftovers of the libations, the leftovers of the money that were originally put away to buy the libations. So these extra monies were supposed to be used to pay for the menorah and for other klei sharet, other vessels that were used in the temple. If they didn't have any leftover of the libations, for example, that month, let's say the wine had a steady price, or it rose, in which case they were still paying the regular price, so there was no leftover money. Then, if you have to buy a new menorah, let's say during that month, or a new knife to slaughter animals, let's say, they would pay from the half shekel coins. Big day kahuna, the kohen's vestments, the clothes worn by the kohanim. Bein big day kohen gadol, bein shar big day kohanim she'evdim behem b'mikdash. The clothes of the high priest, the clothes of the other kohanim who served in the temple. Hako mitrumas halishka was all paid for by the half shekel funds. Gimel kol abehemais hanimtzais b'Yerushalayim. Oy b'chutz ala b'karev mimena. There is a rule which we're going to learn about in the 8th book of the Rambam, that any time you find a lost animal in Jerusalem or nearby, bois oilis, they have to immediately be brought by default as a completely burnt offering. as will be explained in the set of laws that deal with disqualified, sanctified objects. Who pays for the libations? So the Talmud says originally, when somebody would find an animal in Jerusalem and bring it to the temple, he would have to pay for the libations. It became very expensive. People stopped doing the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. They're like, why should I take care of this lost animal? It's going to cost me money to bring the sacrifice. So the Bet Din, the high court, said, you know what? Okay, you bring the animal to the temple, and we'll cover the funds for the libations. So the Rambam says, the libations were paid for by the half shekel separated money. Similarly, if a non-Jew sent a burnt offering from a different country, non-Jews are allowed to send sacrifices to the temple, but they could only be used as burnt offerings. He can't bring any other type of offering. You know why? The Maharal says that the concept of holy eating is a Jewish concept. By default, a human cannot understand how you can make eating holy. Sacrifice, totally to God, I get that, that's holy. But that a Kohen should eat meat, and there should be a divine service involved in that, that's only a Yiddish Shekap can understand. So therefore, when a non-Jew sends a sacrifice, he could only send a sacrifice that would totally be burnt, not any other type that would be eaten by the Kohen. So when the non-Jew sends this burnt offering, let's say he didn't send enough money to cover the libations. He didn't know you have to bring wine and flour and oil. He thought it's just an animal. So who covers the difference? They would bring the libations for this non-Jewish sacrifice from the dedicated funds separated from the half shekel coins. Dalid, ger shemeis v'hiniach zvachim, if a convert dies and he leaves over sacrifices that he had separated to be brought to the temple, he never had a chance to, and he has no relatives. Im yesh lein nesachim, if we find in his possessions money or the actual libations, kreven mishaloi, we bring the libations from his property. V'im lav, if not, bayin mitrumas halishka, then the half shekel funds would fill in and pay for his libations. Kohen gadol shemeis, if a high priest died, v'lei minu acher tachtav, and nobody else was appointed that same day, makrivenes hachavitin mitrumas halishka, the special sacrifice for the high priest is called chavitin. Chavitin means things made in a pan. Every day, the Kohen gadol had to bring the sacrifice once in the morning, once in the evening. Chavitin, it's like a flour pancake kind of a thing. So let's say he brought his in the morning, then he passed away middle of the day, and no new Kohen gadol stepped in. So who will supply the pancake chavitin for the afternoon? Trumas halishka, the half shekel coins, would pay for that. Mevakre mumim shebirushalayim, those people who were specialized in checking animals for blemishes. Before you bring an animal as a sacrifice, you have to check it, make sure that it's complete, no blemish. So there were people that did that as a job. They checked all the Jews' sacrifices for blemishes. And the Torah sages who would teach the laws of ritual slaughter to the Kohanim, or the laws of Kemitza, how to take a fistful. Because when you use the flour offering, you have to take a Kemitza, 3 fingers full from the flour. There's a special way how to do it. And there were these sages that would teach the Kohanim how to do it. The Nashim HaMegadles B'nei Lepara Aduma, and the special women who would raise their children to be totally ritually pure, so they can be involved in the red heifer procedure. The red heifer was extreme care was taken to do all the steps of the process in extreme purity, to the point that they would have women who, while they were still pregnant, they would take them to an area that was totally rid of any possibility of becoming ritually impure. It would be total rock, and they would hollow out the area under the rock. Once you have rock with a hollow area under it, you cannot become impure by stepping on it. So these women would live there. They would give birth there, so these kids would be born in a state of purity, and they would grow up there not touching anybody, no contact with nobody impure. Huh? These were wives of the Kohanim. Yes, special Kohanim wives. The family of the Kohanim. And they would literally have to live there for 8-9 years, because they would use a kid for part of the process, and it costs money. They're going for 8 years. Who's going to pay their salary? So all of these people, says the Rambam, Kula Noitlin Scharan Mitrumas Halishka. All of these people take their pay from the half shekel separated coins. In other words, the blemish checkers, the teachers of the slaughter and the Kemitza, and these women got their salary from there. How much was the pay? There was no amount. Whatever the high court decided, that's what they got. Hey, in the sabbatical year, everything is ownerless, yes? Typically, any field you can walk into, take whatever you want. Now, the thing is, there's a special law that the Omer sacrifice, the new barley sacrifice, and the Shtei Halechem, the 2 breads that were brought on Shavuot from wheat, had to come from Chadash, new grain that grew that year. But if everything is ownerless, how is the temple going to get barley and wheat to bring these new sacrifices. Soichrin Beis Din Shomrin. So the Rambam says the high court would hire guards, special guards, sheyishmeru miktzah svichim shetzamchu, to guard some of the wild grain that would grow. Of course, you can't plant anything, but there would always be wild stuff growing, and they would guard some of it. So later on in the year, they can bring the omer, barley offering, and the shtei alechem, the two breads on Shavuot, she'ein bain melamim chadash, because they can only be brought from new grain that grew this year. So these policemen, these guards, would take their pay from the half shekel coins. What if somebody says, you know what, I don't want pay. I want to guard, it's a big merit for me to guard this field for the Bet HaMikdash. Don't give me any pay, I'll do it for free. Ein shaymeleh, we don't listen to him. Everybody knows when you get paid for something, there's more value. Mishum ba'alei zreya, especially over here, because there was a worry of strong people. Shema yavayu v'yitlu mehem. Strong guy is going to want some barley or wheat. He'll come and take it. If you're not being paid, there's no incentive for you to do your job. Therefore, the sages enacted that these people should actually get paid from the temple chamber. So everybody would separate, everybody would go away from the place where these guys were guarding. Zion, people who would check Torah scrolls or Torah books, which were also in those days written on scrolls in Jerusalem. And any judge who took upon himself to judge thieves or robbers in Jerusalem, they would take also their pay from the half shekel funds. Talmud explains, because any rabbi who judges a case, the litigants are going to pay him. But if a rabbi is judging a thief, who's going to pay? The thief's not paying for it to have his own court, his own law adjudicated. So the temple would pay for it. How much would these Torah checkers or judges take? 90 mana, 90, let's call them $100 bills. A mana is like equal to 100 zuz every year. If that wasn't enough for their salary, even if they don't want any more, they want to make their own living, no, the temple would give them whatever they needed, for them, for their wives, for their children, and for their household members. We covered them completely. So this is all the Trumas Halishka, this is all the money that was in the sacks, the original sacks that were separated. Where's my picture over here? These ones. Now what about the Shiare Halishka? What about the leftover money? Leftover in those boxes or just in this chamber in general, what was that used for? So the Rambam says, Halacha Ches, Kevesh hayubainin meharabayis laharamishcha. They used to build a ramp straight from the Temple Mount all the way to the Mount of Olives. Sha'alav hayumaitziin para aduma, where they used to take the para aduma, the red heifer, right out, because it had to be burnt on a mountain that was right opposite the temple. This is the Mount of Olives. That's the temple. It's not so clear the picture. But they would build a ramp with these special arches, because once you have arches, they can't become ritually impure. So it was a way that they kept the ritual purity. And they would walk straight from the Temple Mount down to the Mount of Olives. There was also another ramp that was used to take out the goat that was sent away on Yom Kippur. They also built a ramp. Why? Because there were some anxious Jews that used to find the Kohen who was in charge of taking this goat, and they would nudge him, they would push him, say, go, we want everybody to be forgiven. So they built a ramp where he doesn't have to deal with them. He just walk on the high road. So these two ramps, who paid for them? They were both made from the leftover money in the chamber, not the ones that were actually put into the sacks. And also the actual mizbeach, the actual altar, and the heichal, temple building, or the azarot, the courtyards, they were all constructed from the leftover money in the chamber. Amas hamayim she'Yerushalayim, a main channel of water in Jerusalem. The walls of Jerusalem, all of its towers, and all the city's needs, were all paid for by the leftovers in the chamber. If a non-Jew came over and wanted to donate money towards these causes, or to work for free, we do not take his money, even if he's a righteous Gentile. He keeps the 7 laws of Noach. Shenemar, as it says, Ezra told the non-Jews in his time when they were building the second temple, it's not for you and us to build a temple together. It's a Jewish thing. And it says, you have no portion or right or memorial in Jerusalem. In other words, we want it to be a totally Jewish project. Even today, when we construct Jewish study halls, we do our best not to take funds only from within the Jewish community. What if there was leftover money? You took all the half shekel coins, you put them in the sacks, you used them for all the needs, and there was still leftover money. What you did was you would buy male animals, and they would all be brought as burnt offerings. Because the Bet Din, the High Court, made a stipulation that any leftover money should be used for this, for burnt offerings and animals. They would never bring burnt offerings, because the community never brings a bird as a communal offering. All of these burnt offerings that were brought from the leftover of the half shekel coins, they were called dessert for the Mizbeach. If there was ever like a non-busy day, nothing going on and no action, you would bring these animals and they would keep the Mizbeach busy. Yod, on the other hand, Shekalim shalohi spikulan l'chol karbanes hatzibur. What if you had too little half shekel coins? There was too little funds. They weren't enough for all the communal needs or offerings. They would dig into the other fund, the fund that was usually used for temple upkeep, and they would use it for the sacrifices. But the other way never went. The upkeep treasury could never dig in to the fund of the half shekel coins. That was reserved. Yud Aleph, Nisan. Once the next year, the new month of Nisan came in, you can only bring communal sacrifices from the new half shekel coins, right? Every year, the first day of Adar, they made an announcement to bring your new half shekel coins, because by the time Nisan came in, you had to be buying your new sacrifices from the new money. If the new money wasn't collected yet, we can still buy with the old funds. Therefore, if the new month of Nisan arrives, and they have leftover animals that were meant to be the daily sacrifices, but they were bought with the old funds, what do you do with them? Very rare occasion. You were allowed to redeem them and make them mundane, even though they were fully complete with no blemish. And the money would now go to the leftovers of the old shkalim, which was used to buy dessert, those extra burnt offerings for the altar. Because it was a stipulation of the High Court that any animal that was bought for the purposes of being used in a daily sacrifice, that if they wouldn't need them anymore, they can be given out to the mundane. Typically, hektish, once something becomes consecrated, it stays consecrated. You can't bring it out. But over here, they can use money to buy out these animals, transfer the holiness from the animals to the money, and the money would go to the fund that would supply those offerings that would keep the Mizbeach busy. Yud Beis, a similar thing was done with the leftover ketoret. Every day in Shacharis we say that they would make a ketoret mix once a year with 368 maneh, 368 portions, one for every day of the solar year, plus 3 for Yom Kippur. Now, the Jewish calendar follows the lunar year. Tomorrow we're starting the laws of the Jewish calendar. In a lunar year, there's about 354 days. So you always had that difference of extra ketoris portions at the end of every year. So what do you do with the extra ketoris? So typically, based on the last halacha, you would just think simply transfer the value to the money and take the money into the fund to buy more sacrifices. Here the Rambam says it was a bit more complex. Why? Because the ketoris was so special, they wanted to keep the funds all within something holy. So they would do the following. The day that the new month of Nisan came in, they would transfer the holiness of the Ketorah spices onto the money that was meant to be used to pay the artisans who had crafted the Ketorahs. Then, that money that was intended for the artisans now became holy. They would put that into the fund that would buy the offerings to keep the Mizbeach busy. And we would give the actual Ketorahs mix to the artisans as their pay. Here's your pay. So now it all stays in the holy table. Then we would take the new money that came in and buy the ketoris from the artisans from the new money. And then they walked away with money, their salary, and now we have the ketoris in a new way. So we were able to sacrifice it from the money of the new separated half shekel coins. But again, if they have no new money coming in yet, then of course they can bring them from the collection of the previous year. Blessed is the merciful one who gives us assistance. Mazal tov for completing Hilchos Shekalim.